You wake up at 3 a.m. Your heart pounds. You think something is wrong. You check your phone. You worry about the big meeting tomorrow. You think you have insomnia. You think you are broken. But what if you are not? What if the problem is not you, but the world you live in? For centuries, waking up in the middle of the night was not a disorder. It was normal, it was expected. People had a first sleep and a second sleep. In between, they would get up for an hour or two. They would think, pray, talk with their spouse, or just sit by the fire. This period was called the watch. It was a time of quiet contemplation that we have almost completely lost. Why do we believe in the 8-hour, uninterrupted block of sleep? Is it truly natural, or is it a modern invention, a product of factory whistles and electric lights? We are obsessed with sleep hygiene, sleep trackers, and perfect sleep scores. Yet we are more tired and anxious about sleep than ever before. Medieval people had none of these things. They slept on straw beds in cold, dark rooms. They often slept with several other people. Yet they might have had a healthier relationship with sleep than we do. Their lives were tied to the sun and the seasons, not the clock. They accepted sleep's interruptions. They saw dreams as meaningful. They understood that rest was not a performance. Maybe it is time we looked back to learn how to move forward. Maybe the past holds the key to resting well in the present. Number 22, what if waking up in the middle of the night was normal? Most of us think waking up at 3 a.m. is a problem. We see it as a failure. We lie in bed, getting frustrated. Our mind races. We worry about being tired the next day. This anxiety makes it even harder to fall back asleep. But this entire way of thinking is new. For most of human history, this experience was not called insomnia. It was just called night. The idea of a single, solid, 8-hour block of sleep is a modern invention. Historian A. Roger E. Kirch of Virginia Tech made this discovery. He spent years digging through historical records. He looked at diaries, court documents, medical books, and literature from before the Industrial Revolution. He found hundreds of references to a different way of sleeping. It was called segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. Here is how it worked. People would go to bed a couple hours after dusk. They would sleep for about 4 hours. This was called the first sleep or dead sleep. Then they would wake up. They would stay awake for 1 to 2 hours. This period was known as the watch. After the watch, they would go back to bed for their second sleep, which would last until dawn. This was not something a few people did. It was the standard way of sleeping across Western cultures for centuries. Eckertch's book, At Day's Close Night in Times Past, documents this forgotten pattern. He found references to it everywhere, from Homer's Odyssey to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. A 16th century French physician's manual advised couples that the best time for conception was not at the end of a long, tiring day, but after the first sleep, when they were rested and had more energy. During the watch, people were not idle. They did not lie in bed worrying. They got up. They would poke the fire. They might read by candlelight. They would pray. Religious manuals from the period included special prayers for the hours of the watch. It was a time for quiet reflection and intimacy. People would talk with their spouses, smoke a pipe, or visit neighbors who were also awake. It was a recognized and useful part of the night. It was a period of peace and stillness that our modern world rarely allows. What happened to this natural sleep pattern? The Industrial Revolution and the invention of artificial lighting changed everything. Streetlights and indoor gas lamps pushed the day later into the night. People started staying up later, socializing, and working. The night was no longer a time of enforced rest. It became a new frontier for activity. The old rhythm of first and second sleep did not fit with the rigid schedules of factory work. Time became money. A single, consolidated block of sleep was more efficient. By the early 20th century, the idea of segmented sleep had almost completely vanished from our collective memory. But maybe our bodies have not forgotten. In the early 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Ware conducted an experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health. He took a group of people and deprived them of artificial light for 14 hours a day, mimicking the natural light cycles of winter. At first, they slept for a long time, but after a few weeks, a strange thing happened. They started to wake up in the middle of the night. They would sleep for about 4 hours, wake for 1 or 2 hours, and then fall back asleep for another 4 hours. They had naturally reverted to the segmented sleep pattern of our ancestors. This suggests that our modern insomnia might not be a disorder at all. It might be our body's natural rhythm trying to break through our modern artificial schedules. The problem is not the waking. The problem is our reaction to it. We panic. We think something is wrong. The medieval person would have accepted it. They would have seen it as an opportunity for quiet thought or prayer. We see it as a medical condition that needs fixing. So the next time you wake up in the dark, maybe try something different. Do not look at the clock. Do not reach for your phone. Do not worry about being tired. Instead, maybe see it as a gift, an hour of stillness, a moment to think without distraction. An echo of a time when the night was not something to be conquered, but something to be experienced. What if our 8-hour sleep or bust mentality is a product of industrial capitalism, not human biology? How many people are medicated for a sleep disorder? That is actually just their body's natural rhythm trying to reassert itself. What creative potential and spiritual depth have we lost by eliminating that quiet, reflective hour in the middle of the night? Number 21, did they worry less about how much they slept? We live in an age of sleep anxiety. We track our sleep with apps and wearables. Our REM cycles, our deep sleep percentages, and our sleep score. We are told that getting less than 8 hours is a health catastrophe. This constant monitoring has created a new kind of stress. It is called orthosomnia. The term was coined in a 2017 case study in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. It describes an unhealthy obsession with achieving perfect sleep, often based on data from sleep trackers. People become so focused on the numbers that they get anxious, which in turn ruins their sleep. It is a vicious cycle. Now, imagine a world without clocks. Imagine a world where the very concept of an hour was fluid and vague. That was the medieval world. For most people, time was not measured in precise, equal units. It was measured by the sun, the church bells, and the rhythms of the seasons. There was no alarm clock to jolt you awake. There was no pressure to get exactly 8 hours. You slept when it was dark and you were tired. You woke when it was light or when the rooster crowed. This different relationship with time meant a different relationship with sleep. People did not think of sleep as a commodity to be measured and optimized. It was just a natural part of life. Okay? They did not have the language or the tools to worry about sleep efficiency. If they had a bad night, they had a bad night. They did not log it into an app and receive a poor score that would make them anxious for the entire day. They simply got on with their lives. They might take a nap later if they needed one. The very idea of a universal 8 hours is a modern construct. It became popular in the 20th century, promoted by scientists and public health officials. But it is a blunt instrument. Sleep needs vary from person to person. They also vary across a single person's lifetime. A teenager needs more sleep than a senior citizen. Your sleep needs change when you are sick or stressed. The medieval world, without a rigid standard, allowed for this natural variation. People slept longer in the deep dark of winter and shorter during the long days of summer. Their sleep was adaptable and flexible, just like life itself. Of course, this does not mean medieval people never had sleep problems. In medical texts from the period, like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum from the 11th century, offer advice for those who could not sleep. They recommended things like a warm bath, a cup of milk, or listening to soft music. But their remedies were gentle and holistic. They focused on balancing the body's hummers through diet and lifestyle. They did not see insomnia as a standalone disease to be attacked with powerful drugs. It was a symptom of an imbalance in the person's overall life. The pressure we put on ourselves is immense. We feel guilty if we do not get our prescribed amount of sleep. We see it as a personal failure. This pressure is entirely a product of our modern culture. We have turned rest into another performance metric, another area of life where we can succeed or fail. The medieval person was free from this burden. They slept because their body told them to. Their sleep was guided by nature, not by numbers on a screen. Perhaps we could learn from this. Maybe we should put away our sleep trackers for a while. Maybe we should stop obsessing over the perfect 8 hours. We could try listening to our bodies instead. Go to bed when you feel tired. Get up when you feel rested. Do not panic if you wake up during the night. Accept that some nights will be better than others. By removing the pressure to perform, we might find that sleep comes more easily. We might rediscover sleep as a natural process, not a task to be completed. Is the modern obsession with sleep data actually causing more sleep problems than it solves? Have we forgotten how to listen to our own body's signals for rest? What would happen if we treated sleep less like a chore and more like a gentle, natural rhythm we can trust? Number 20, how did darkness shape their rest? Turn off all the lights in your home, go to a room with no windows. What do you feel? For many of us, absolute darkness is unsettling. It is unfamiliar. We live in a world that is never truly dark. Streetlights cast an orange glow through our curtains. The blue light from our phone screens follows us to bed. We have conquered the night, but in doing so, we have lost something profound. For medieval people, true darkness was a nightly reality. Once the sun went down and the fire was banked, the world was plunged into a deep, profound blackness. This darkness was not empty. It was a powerful presence that shaped every aspect of their lives, especially their sleep. The absence of artificial light enforced a strict rhythm. When it got dark, activity ceased. It was time to go to bed. There was no option to stay up binge watching a show or scrolling through social media. This nightly immersion in darkness had a powerful biological effect. Our bodies are designed to respond to light and dark. A tiny region in our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus acts as our master clock. It gets its cues from light. When light hits our eyes, it tells the brain to be awake and alert. When darkness falls, it signals the pineal gland to produce melatonin, the hormone that makes us feel sleepy. The modern world has thrown this system into chaos. A 2011 study from researchers at Harvard University showed that exposure to room light before bedtime suppresses melatonin production. The blue light emitted by our screens is particularly disruptive. It tricks our brains into thinking it is still daytime, delaying the onset of sleep and reducing its quality. But medieval people had no such problem. The only light they had at night was the dim, warm glow of a candle or a fire. This type of light has a much smaller impact on melatonin. When darkness fell, their bodies received a clear, unambiguous signal: it is time to sleep. This deep darkness also made their sleep more consolidated. Without light pollution, their melatonin production would have been robust, leading to a deeper first sleep. This might explain why the watch period between the two sleeps was so common. The body would come up from a very deep sleep into a state of quiet wakefulness before descending again. But the darkness was not just a biological trigger, it was a psychological one. The night was a different world. It was mysterious and often frightening. Folklore was filled with tales of spirits, demons, and creatures that roamed the night. This fear encouraged people to be in bed in the relative safety of their homes. But the darkness also offered a unique kind of peace. It was a forced stillness. A time when the endless labor of the day finally stopped. It was a time for interiority, for thought, for prayer, and for dreams. In his book, The Great Age of the English Essay, critic George Saintsbury notes how literature before the 19th century treats the night with a kind of awe and respect that has since been lost. We have tried to eliminate the night. We have filled it with light and noise and activity. But our biology has not caught up. We are still creatures of the light and dark. Our bodies crave the same clear signals our ancestors received. Perhaps we need to re-embrace a little bit of darkness. We could try dimming the lights in the evening. We could put away our screens an hour before bed. We could get blackout curtains to make our bedrooms as dark as possible. By inviting darkness back into our lives, we might find that we sleep more deeply. We might reconnect with a more natural rhythm. We might rediscover the night not as an inconvenience to be overcome, but as a time of profound rest and renewal. It is a simple change, but it could make a world of difference. What has our war on darkness cost our collective health and well-being? If our brains evolved to sleep in total blackness, are we living in a state of constant low-level jet lag? Could a simple darkness therapy be more effective than many sleeping pills? Number 19 was sleeping together, the norm. In our modern Western culture, the bed is a private space. For adults, it is usually shared only with a partner. For children, the goal is often to get them into their own room and their own bed as quickly as possible. We value our personal space even in sleep, but this is a very recent and culturally specific idea. For most of history, including the medieval period, sleeping was a social affair. Go back in time to a typical medieval peasant's home, it was often a single room. The whole family, parents, children, and maybe even a grandparent or 2,000 would sleep together. They would often share a single large bed or a mattress on the floor filled with straw or leaves. This was not a choice. It was a necessity. Houses were small and heating was a luxury. Huddling together was the most effective way to stay warm through a long, cold night. The French historian Georges Duby, in his work on medieval private life, describes how the bed was the central piece of furniture in the home, a hub of family life. Even in wealthier households, sleeping alone was rare. The lord and lady of a castle might have their own chamber, but their personal servants would often sleep on pallets at the foot of their bed. This was for security and convenience. If the lord needed something in the middle of the night, a servant was right there. Travelers staying at an inn would not expect a private room. They would be lucky to get a spot in a large bed shared with several complete strangers. The Great Bed of Ware, a massive oak bed built in the late 16th century and now in the Victoria and Albert Museum, could supposedly sleep 4 couples at once. It was famous, a tourist attraction in its own right, but the idea behind it was not unusual. This practice of co-sleeping had profound implications for how people experienced the night. There was a sense of shared vulnerability and mutual protection. The night was dark and could be dangerous. Sleeping in a group provided a feeling of safety in numbers. It also meant that sleep was never a solitary experience. You were always aware of the breathing, the shifting, and the snoring of others. There was less privacy, but perhaps also less loneliness. Modern science is beginning to re-examine the benefits of co-sleeping, particularly for infants. For decades, Western pediatric advice has strongly favored separate sleeping arrangements to reduce the risk of SIDS. However, anthropologist James McKenna from the University of Notre Dame has studied how mothers and infants sleep together. His research suggests that when done safely, co-sleeping can help regulate a baby's breathing, heart rate, and temperature. The baby and mother often sync their sleep cycles, which can also make breastfeeding easier. This is how humans have slept for millennia. The solitary sleeping infant is a very recent experiment. For adults, the picture is more complicated. Many of us find it hard to sleep with a partner who snores or tosses and turns. Yet, some studies suggest that sleeping with a partner can have benefits. A 2020 study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry found that couples who sleep together often experience more REM sleep and less fragmented sleep than those who sleep alone. They also reported that sleeping together improved their relationship. There seems to be a psychological comfort in sleeping next to another person that can outweigh the physical disturbances. We are not suggesting that we should all go back to sharing a bed with strangers at an inn, but we can question our modern insistence on solitary sleep. We can be more understanding of children who want to sleep with their parents. We can recognize the comfort and connection that comes from sharing a bed with a partner. The medieval world reminds us that sleep has not always been a private, isolated activity. It has been a communal one. It was a time to share warmth, safety, and a common human experience. In our increasingly isolated world, maybe there is something to be learned from that. In our quest for perfect, undisturbed individual sleep, have we created a new form of nighttime loneliness? Are our sterile, private bedrooms contributing to a wider sense of social disconnection? Could the deep-seated human need for safety in a group explain why so many people feel anxious when sleeping alone? Number 18. How did they use sleep to heal? Today, we think of sleep as a time for the body to passively recover. We know it is important for memory consolidation, muscle repair, and immune function. But we generally see medicine as something we do to the body while it is awake. We take a pill, we get a shot, we have surgery. For medieval doctors, sleep itself was an active and crucial part of medicine. It was not just a prerequisite for health, it was a powerful tool for healing. Their medical framework was based on the theory of the 4 humors, which originated with the ancient Greeks, particularly Hippocrates and Galen. This theory held that the body was filled with 4 basic substances: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. A healthy person had these 4 humors in perfect balance. Illness was caused by an excess or deficiency of one or more of them. The goal of medicine was to restore this balance. Sleep played a vital role in this process. Medieval physicians believed that during sleep, the body worked to concoct or digest the humors, purifying them and redistributing them correctly. A good night's sleep was seen as essential for maintaining humoral balance. A book from the 14th century, the Tacunum Sanitatis, which was a handbook on health and well-being, has detailed illustrations and advice about sleep. It recommended sleeping in a quiet, dark room and avoiding sleeping during the day unless one was ill. When a person was sick, sleep became even more important. It was the primary environment in which the body could fight the disease and rebalance its humors. Doctors would carefully observe a patient's sleep patterns. Was their sleep restful or agitated? Were they having nightmares? This was all diagnostic information. They would then prescribe treatments designed to promote the right kind of sleep. These were not powerful sedatives like we have today. They were gentle remedies derived from herbs and diet. For example, to help someone sleep, a medieval doctor might recommend a diet of cold and moist, foods like lettuce or cucumber, which were thought to calm an overabundance of hot and dry yellow bile color, often associated with agitation and sleeplessness. They might prescribe a pillow filled with calming herbs, like lavender or chamomile. A warm bath with mallow leaves was another common prescription. The focus was on creating the ideal conditions for the body to do its own healing work during sleep. This contrasts sharply with our modern approach. When we cannot sleep, we often reach for a sleeping pill. These pills can be effective, but they often induce a state that is not the same as natural sleep. For example, many common hypnotics suppress REM sleep or deep, slow-wave sleep. They knock you out, but they do not necessarily provide the restorative qualities of natural sleep. The medieval approach, while based on a flawed scientific model, was perhaps more holistic. It sought to gently guide the body back to its natural sleep rhythm, rather than forcing it into unconsciousness. The connection between sleep and the immune system is now well established by modern science. A 2019 study in the Journal of Experimental Medicine found that a good night's sleep can boost the effectiveness of certain immune cells, called T cells, in fighting off infection. When we are sleep deprived, our immune system is compromised. The medieval doctors did not know about T cells, but they knew from observation that sick people who slept well recovered faster. Their humoral theory was their way of explaining this observable fact. We could learn from their focus on sleep as an active healing process. When we get sick, our first instinct is often to take medication to suppress the symptoms so we can keep going. Perhaps we should instead listen to our body's desire to rest. We could see sleep not as an inconvenience or a sign of weakness, but as the most important medicine we can take. We can create a healing environment for ourselves, a dark, quiet room, a light meal, a calming cup of herbal tea. By honoring sleep's role in our recovery, we may find we get better faster and more completely. Is our modern tendency to power through illness with medication a dangerous rejection of our body's most fundamental healing mechanism? What if hospitals focused as much on creating perfect sleep environments as they do on administering drugs? Could the ancient holistic view of sleep as a concoction of health be a more useful metaphor than our modern view of it as simple recharging? Number 17, was a cold bedroom a good thing? We love our creature comforts. Central heating is a modern marvel we take for granted. We set our thermostats to a comfortable temperature and sleep in a climate-controlled environment year-round. The idea of sleeping in a genuinely cold room seems unpleasant, something to be endured during a power outage, not sought out. But for medieval people, a cold bedroom was not a choice, it was the reality for most of the year. And surprisingly, this might have been good for their sleep. Medieval homes were notoriously drafty and difficult to heat. Even in a castle, the main source of heat was a large fireplace, which was often in a communal hall. Bedrooms, if they existed as separate rooms, were typically unheated. People relied on heavy curtains around the bed, thick blankets, and the body heat of their bedfellows to stay warm. They would wear nightcaps to prevent heat loss from their heads. They would go to bed in a cold room and wake up in a cold room. This sounds miserable to us, but science suggests they may have been onto something. Our body temperature naturally fluctuates over a 24-hour cycle. It starts to drop in the evening, a couple hours before bedtime. This drop in core body temperature is a signal to the brain to initiate sleep. The temperature continues to fall throughout the night, reaching its lowest point in the early morning, before starting to rise again as we approach wake-up time. Sleeping in a warm room can interfere with this natural process. If the ambient temperature is too high, it makes it harder for the body to cool down, which can delay sleep onset and lead to more fragmented, less restful sleep. A cool room, on the other hand, helps facilitate this natural temperature drop. The ideal temperature for sleep is surprisingly cool, generally recommended to be between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 19 degrees Celsius. A 2014 study published in the journal Diabetes looked at the metabolic effects of sleeping at different temperatures. They had a group of healthy men sleep for a month at a controlled temperature of 75 degF, 24 dC, then a month at 66 dF, 19 dC, a month back at 75 degF, and finally a month at a warm 80 on degF, 27 dC. The results were striking. After sleeping in the cool 66 degF room for a month, the men had almost doubled their amount of brown fat, a type of good fat that burns calories to generate heat. They also showed improved insulin sensitivity. Sleeping in the warm room reversed these benefits. And medieval people were, in essence, conducting this experiment every night. Their cold sleeping environments would have promoted this natural thermal regulation. The cold would have helped them fall asleep and stay asleep, and may have provided metabolic benefits as well. They did not do it for their health, they did it out of necessity, but their bodies benefited nonetheless. Of course, there is a balance. Being too cold is also disruptive to sleep. Shivering will certainly wake you up. The medieval solution was not to heat the room, but to create a warm microclimate in the bed itself. They used layers of bedding, often made of wool, which is an excellent insulator. The four-poster bed with its heavy curtains was not just for privacy, it was a room within a room, designed to trap heat and keep out drafts. We can learn a lesson here. We might be keeping our bedrooms too warm. We could try turning down the thermostat at night. It is better for the environment, it saves money on heating bills, and it might help us sleep better. We can use blankets to regulate our temperature, just as our ancestors did. A cool room with a warm bed might be the perfect combination for deep restorative sleep. It is a simple, low-tech solution that aligns our modern lives with our ancient biology. Are our cozy, centrally heated homes disrupting a fundamental biological process necessary for good sleep? Could something as simple as turning down the thermostat be a more effective sleep aid than many supplements on the market? Have we become so accustomed to comfort that we have lost a degree of metabolic resilience our ancestors took for granted? Number 16, what did they eat before bed? We are constantly bombarded with advice about what and when to eat. A lot of that advice focuses on the evening meal. Do not eat too late. Avoid heavy, fatty foods. Stay away from caffeine and alcohol. Much of this is sound advice, but the medieval relationship between food and sleep was more complex, deeply rooted in the theory of the four humors and the practical realities of their lives. For most medieval people, the main meal of the day was eaten around midday. The evening meal, or supper, was typically a much lighter affair. This was partly for practical reasons. It was hard to cook and eat in the dark, but it was also based on medical theory. The great physician Galen, whose ideas dominated medieval medicine, taught that the stomach worked best when a person was active. He believed that going to sleep on a full stomach was a bad idea because the food would sit there and putrefy, creating bad humors. A common medieval medical text, the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitatum, advised, "Great suppers will the stomach's peace impair, arise from table with a stomach spare." The idea was to eat a light, easily digestible meal a few hours before bed. This would give the stomach time to do its work before the body settled into the deep rest of the first sleep. Your foods recommended for the evening included things like bread, cooked fruits, and some vegetables. Heavy meats and rich sauces were to be avoided. However, they also believed that going to bed completely hungry was a problem. An empty stomach was thought to produce its own set of bad humors, leading to restless sleep. The goal was to find a balance. A small, soothing snack before bed was often recommended, especially for those who had trouble sleeping. What kind of snack, something moist and cooling, was often preferred. A cup of warm milk with honey, or a drink of hot milk curdled with wine or ale, was a common choice. These were seen as calming and sleep-inducing. Modern science largely supports this ancient wisdom. Eating a large, heavy meal close to bedtime can indeed interfere with sleep. The body has to work hard to digest it, which can raise your body temperature and heart rate at a time when they should be dropping. Fatty foods can trigger acid reflux when you lie down. On the other hand, going to bed hungry can also be a problem. A growling stomach or a drop in blood sugar can easily wake you up. The types of food they recommended are also interesting. The idea of warm milk has survived as a folk remedy for sleep for centuries. We now know that milk contains tryptophan, an amino acid that the body uses to produce serotonin and melatonin. The carbohydrates from bread or honey can help make that tryptophan more available to the brain. Herbal infusions were also common. Teas made from chamomile, valerian, or lemon balm have been used as sleep aids for thousands of years. We now know these herbs contain compounds that have mild sedative effects. So the medieval approach was not about rigid rules, but about listening to the body and seeking balance. It was about eating a main meal when you were most active, and a light meal before a period of rest. It was about avoiding foods that were clearly disruptive while using gentle, nourishing foods and drinks to promote tranquility. This is a far cry from our often chaotic modern eating habits. Many of us eat our largest meal of the day late in the evening, sometimes just before collapsing into bed. We consume caffeine throughout the day and alcohol at night, both of which are major sleep disruptors. Perhaps we could benefit from adopting a more medieval supper schedule, a lighter evening meal eaten a few hours before bed. And if we are hungry later, a small calming snack, not a raid on the refrigerator. It is a simple shift that respects the body's natural rhythms of activity and rest. Is the modern dinner as the main meal of the day a mistake, a relic of an industrial work schedule that is at odds with our digestive biology? How much of our national sleep problem is actually a national digestion problem? Could the simple act of switching our main meal to lunchtime radically improve public health? Number 15, did their dreams mean something more? In our post-Freudian world, we have a complicated relationship with dreams. We might see them as random neural firings, the brain's way of cleaning out the day's mental junk. Or we might see them as a window into our subconscious full of symbols about our repressed desires and anxieties. We might share a particularly strange dream with a friend, but we rarely treat it as a piece of objective information about the outside world. For medieval people, dreams were something else entirely. They were often seen as a bridge to the divine, a source of prophecy, or a warning from beyond. This view had deep roots in the classical and biblical worlds. In the Bible, God often speaks to people through dreams. Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams of fat and thin cows, saving Egypt from famine. The prophet Daniel interpreted the dreams of King Nebuchadnezzar. This tradition carried right through the Middle Ages. Dreams were taken very seriously. They were not just a private psychological experience. They could be messages with real-world consequences. Medieval thinkers developed complex systems for interpreting dreams. One of the most influential texts was the One Era Critica by a 2nd century Greek writer named Artemidorus, which was copied and studied throughout the medieval period. There were also many popular dream books that offered simple interpretations for common dream symbols. Dreaming of flying might mean future success. Dreaming of falling might mean you're in danger of sin. But it was not just about simple fortune-telling. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus debated the nature of dreams. They classified them into different types. Some dreams came from the body, caused by an imbalance of the humors. For example, a person with too much blood might have cheerful, ruddy dreams. Some dreams came from the devil, designed to tempt or deceive, and some dreams came from God, offering guidance or prophecy. The challenge was to tell them apart. A wise person, often a priest or a spiritual advisor, was needed to help interpret a significant dream. This belief had a profound effect on how people experienced their sleep. The dream world was not just an escape. It was a real place with real stakes. A terrifying nightmare was not just a bad dream, it could be a spiritual attack. A beautiful, inspiring dream was not just a pleasant fantasy, it could be a vision from a saint or an angel. This made the experience of dreaming much more vivid and important than it is for most of us today. Chronicles from the period are filled with accounts of kings and saints who made major life decisions based on a dream. For example, the Life of King Edward the Confessor, written in the 11th century, recounts several of his prophetic dreams. While we no longer believe that a dream about a black dog is a literal demon, modern psychology has not entirely dismissed the importance of dreams. Carl Jung, a student of Freud, broke with his mentor by arguing that dreams were not just about repressed personal desires. He believed they connected us to a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of human archetypes and symbols. For Jung, dreams were a way for the psyche to seek wholeness and balance. Modern sleep science has also shown that dreaming, which occurs mostly during REM sleep, is crucial for emotional regulation and processing difficult experiences. It is how we make sense of our world and our feelings. Perhaps we have lost something by overly rationalizing our dreams. We are quick to dismiss them as meaningless noise, but what if we treated them with a little more of the medieval respect? What if we paid more attention to them? We could try keeping a dream journal. We could reflect on the images and feelings in our dreams, not as literal predictions, but as messages from a deeper part of ourselves. We do not need to believe they are from God or the devil to see them as valuable. They are a unique source of information about our own inner world. By listening to our dreams, we might learn things about ourselves that our waking mind is too busy or too defensive to recognize. By dismissing dreams as random brain noise, what essential information about our own emotional and psychological state are we ignoring? If dreams are the brain's way of processing difficult emotions, does our lack of attention to them hinder our mental health? Could re-engaging with our dream lives be a powerful, untapped tool for self-discovery and personal growth? Number 14, why was napping so normal? In our hustle culture, the nap is often seen as a sign of laziness or indulgence. We associate it with toddlers and the elderly. If an adult needs a nap, we might assume they are sick or that they did not get enough sleep the night before. We are supposed to power through the day, fueled by caffeine if necessary, but this is a very modern and unnatural way of living. For much of human history, including the medieval period, a midday nap was a normal and sensible part of the daily rhythm. Our bodies have a natural cycle of alertness and sleepiness. This is called the circadian rhythm. While the strongest drive for sleep occurs at night, there is a secondary dip in alertness that happens in the early afternoon, typically between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. This is often called the post-lunch dip. We tend to blame it on a heavy lunch, but it happens even if we do not eat at all. It is a biological signal for a period of rest. Medieval people whose lives were more in tune with natural rhythms listened to this signal. In agricultural societies, the workday started at dawn. By midday, after several hours of hard physical labor under the sun, a rest was not just welcome, it was necessary. The practice of the siesta in Mediterranean countries is a direct descendant of this pattern. It makes perfect sense to rest during the hottest part of the day and resume work when it cools down. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, which organized the daily life of monks, explicitly included a period for a meridianus or midday sleep, especially during the summer months. This was not seen as laziness. It was part of a balanced and holy life, ensuring the monks had the energy for their afternoon prayers and duties. The structure of the monastic day, with its regular cycles of prayer, work, and rest, recognized the body's natural need for a midday pause. The loss of the nap is another casualty of the Industrial Revolution. The factory whistle did not allow for a midday rest. The workday was structured around the clock, not the sun or the body. Efficiency meant continuous labor. We have inherited this mindset. We see the day as a single block of productive time, and any deviation from that is seen as a loss. But modern science is confirming the wisdom of the nap. A short nap of 20 to 30 minutes can significantly improve alertness, performance, and mood. NASA conducted a famous study in 1995 on military pilots and astronauts. They found that a 40-minute nap improved performance by 34% and alertness by 100%. Numerous other studies have shown that napping can improve memory, reduce stress, and even lower the risk of heart disease. Some forward-thinking companies are starting to recognize this. They are installing nap pods or quiet rooms where employees can take a short rest during the day. They have realized that a well-rested employee is a more productive and creative employee. But this is still the exception, not the rule. For most of us, napping is something we have to do in secret, slumped over our desk or in our car during the lunch break. We could learn from the medieval acceptance of the nap. We could start to see that afternoon dip in energy not as a problem to be solved with coffee, but as a natural signal to be heeded. We do not all have the luxury of taking a nap every day, but on the weekends, instead of pushing through chores, we could allow ourselves a short rest. We could advocate for a culture that sees rest not as a weakness, but as a vital component of a healthy and productive life. The medieval peasant and the Benedictine monk understood this. It is time we did too. Is the 9-to-5 workday, without a designated rest period, fundamentally at odds with human biology? How much productivity is lost every afternoon due to people fighting their natural sleepiness instead of embracing a short nap? What if we started judging a company's culture not by its coffee machine, but by its nap pods? Number 13, how did the seasons change their sleep? We live in a seasonally agnostic world. Thanks to central heating, air conditioning, and artificial light, our indoor environment is largely the same in January as it is in July. We get up at the same time, work the same hours, and go to bed at the same time, regardless of whether the sun sets at 4 p.m. or 9 p.m. We have flattened the seasons into a single, monotonous experience. This would have been completely alien to someone living in the medieval period. Their lives were utterly governed by the seasons. The amount of available daylight dictated the length of their workday. Their sleep patterns naturally expanded and contracted with the changing length of the night. In the winter, the nights were long and cold. In Northern Europe, it could be dark for 16 hours or more. This was a time of enforced rest. There was little work that could be done on the farm after dark. The home was a refuge from the cold. People went to bed early, not long after sunset. They likely slept for much longer than we do today. The historian Roger E. Kirch notes that historical records suggest people might have spent 10 hours or more in bed during the winter, which would include their 2 sleeps and the waking watch in between. This extended period of rest was a natural response to the darkness and a way to conserve energy when food might be scarcer. In contrast, the summer was a time of intense activity. The sun rose early and set late. The long daylight hours were needed for planting, growing, and harvesting. People rose at dawn to take advantage of every moment of light. They went to bed later, and their total sleep time was likely much shorter than in the winter. The midday nap, or siesta, became more important during this time, providing a break from the heat and the long hours of labor. This seasonal variation in sleep is not just a cultural artifact, it is deeply rooted in our biology. A 2023 study led by researchers at the University of Washington found that even modern city dwellers, with all their artificial light, show seasonal variations in their sleep. They tend to go to bed later and sleep less in the summer, and go to bed earlier and sleep more in the winter. The effect is small, but it is there, an echo of our ancestral past. The study also found that our REM sleep is significantly longer in the winter. This suggests that our brains have a seasonal clock that our modern lifestyles have tried but failed to completely suppress. For medieval people, this was not a subtle effect, it was the fundamental rhythm of their lives. They did not fight it, they leaned into it. Winter was a time for rest, for mending tools, for storytelling by the fire, and for long nights of sleep. Summer was a time for long days of work, for activity, and for shorter nights. This rhythm of expansion and contraction was built into their year. We have lost this rhythm. We expect our energy levels and productivity to be constant throughout the year. We feel guilty if we feel sluggish and want to sleep more during the dark days of winter. We call this seasonal affective disorder and see it as a pathology to be treated. But perhaps it is not a disorder at all. Perhaps it is a natural, healthy response to the changing seasons, a response we are no longer allowed to honor. We cannot all abandon our jobs and start living like medieval farmers, but we can be more mindful of the seasons. We can give ourselves permission to go to bed a little earlier in the winter. We can be more gentle with ourselves when we feel a natural urge to slow down. We can try to get more sun exposure in the morning during the summer to help set our body clocks. By acknowledging the seasons, we can start to reclaim a more natural and balanced relationship with sleep and with time itself. Is our demand for constant year-round productivity a form of tyranny against our own biological nature? What if seasonal affective disorder is not a mood disorder, but a modern lifestyle disorder caused by our refusal to rest in winter? Could we improve our mental and physical health by designing our work and school schedules to be more flexible with the seasons? Number 12, why was the bed so important? Think about your bed. It is probably in a room dedicated to sleeping. You use it for sleep and maybe for a few other private activities. For most of the day, that room sits empty. The bed is a functional but not central piece of furniture. Now, let's go back to the medieval home. For many, the home was just one room. And in that room, the bed was not just a place to sleep, it was the most important piece of furniture they owned. It was the center of family life. For the wealthy, beds were elaborate, 4-poster structures with expensive hangings and intricate carvings. They were a massive investment and a major status symbol. A lord would often list his best bed in his will, passing it down as a precious heirloom. But the importance of the bed went far beyond its monetary value. It was a multi-purpose space. The bed was where people were born, it was where they died, it was where they convalesced when they were sick. Because it was often the only soft, comfortable place in the house, it was also a place for socializing. The lady of the house might receive guests while propped up on pillows in her bed, a practice that continued for centuries. Legal documents were sometimes signed, and business was conducted on the bed. It was a stage for the most important events of life, from birth to death. In his landmark work, Centuries of Childhood, the historian Philippe Aries describes how the concept of the private bedroom is a relatively modern invention. In medieval and early modern homes, the bed was in a public or semi-public space. The heavy curtains around a 4-poster bed were not just for warmth, they created a small private room when needed. But when the curtains were open, The bed was part of the common living area. This public nature of the bed meant that sleep itself was less private. As we have discussed, families and even strangers often shared a bed. The act of going to bed and waking up was a shared experience. This is a stark contrast to our modern view of sleep as the most private and solitary of activities. The construction of the medieval bed was also different. Mattresses were typically stuffed with straw, feathers, or wool and placed on a latticework of ropes. These ropes had to be tightened regularly to prevent sagging. This is the origin of the phrase sleep tight. The bed was a piece of technology that required regular maintenance. The central role of the bed reminds us that the separation of our lives into distinct functions and rooms is a new idea. We have a room for eating, a room for socializing, and a room for sleeping. For medieval people, life was more integrated. The bed was not just for sleep, just as the main room was not just for eating. This integration may have created a more fluid relationship with sleep. Sleep was not something you went away to do in a separate, isolated part of the house. It was something that happened right in the middle of everything, a natural pause in the flow of family life. We might not want to go back to receiving guests in our bedroom, but we can reflect on what this says about our modern lives. Yeah. We have compartmentalized rest. We have put it in a box in a separate room, and we visit it for a prescribed number of hours each night. This can make sleep feel like a task, another item on our to-do list. The medieval bed as the hub of the home suggests a different view. It suggests that rest is not separate from life, but an integral part of its fabric. It is where life begins, ends, and is lived in between. Have we lost a sense of life's unity by strictly dividing our homes into single-purpose rooms? Does putting the bed in a sleep-only zone add to the pressure to perform when we are there? What if we saw our beds less as a piece of functional equipment and more as the warm central hearth of our personal lives? Number 11 was silence different back then. We think of the past as being quiet. No cars, no airplanes, no televisions. And in many ways, it was. But the silence of the medieval night was not an empty silence. It was filled with sounds that we have mostly lost, and it was a silence that had a different quality and meaning. The first thing to understand is that the background hum of modern life was completely absent. There was no refrigerator buzzing in the corner, no hum of the electrical grid, no distant traffic noise. When it was quiet, it was truly quiet. This profound stillness would have made the sounds that did exist stand out in sharp relief. Inside the house, you would hear the crackle of the fire. As it died down, you would hear the house itself creaking and groaning as the temperature dropped. You would hear the breathing and snoring of everyone else sleeping in the room. You would hear the scuttling of mice in the walls. These were the intimate sounds of the domestic night. Outside, the world was alive with sound. In the country, you would hear the howl of a wolf, the hoot of an owl, the bark of a distant fox. You would hear the wind in the trees and the sound of the rain on the roof. In the city, the sounds were different. The church bells would ring to mark the canonical hours, dividing the night into periods of prayer. The city watch would call out the hour, reassuring citizens that all was well. You might hear a dog barking, a baby crying, or the late-night revelry from a nearby tavern. The historian R. Murray Schafer, in his book The Soundscape, argues that each historical period has its own unique acoustic environment. The pre-industrial soundscape was dominated by the sounds of nature, human voices, and animals. The sounds were generally less constant and less powerful than the sounds of our world. This meant that people likely had a more acute sense of hearing. They were attuned to the subtle sounds of their environment in a way that we are not. This different soundscape would have affected their sleep. The quiet could be profound, allowing for a deep and restorative rest. But the night was also a time of vulnerability. An unusual sound, a twig snapping outside, a floorboard creaking in the wrong way, could be a sign of danger. It could mean a predator, a thief, or something worse. People slept with one ear open, so to speak. Their sleep was likely lighter and more easily disturbed, not because of anxiety in the modern sense, but because of a primal need for vigilance. This contrasts with our modern experience. Many of us cannot sleep in true silence. We have become so accustomed to the constant background noise of our world that its absence is jarring. We use white noise machines or fans to mask the sudden, intermittent sounds, a car alarm, a siren that disrupt our urban sleep. We have replaced the meaningful sounds of the natural world with a meaningless artificial hum. The medieval experience of nighttime sound was richer and more complex than our own. The silence was deeper, but it was also punctuated by sounds that were full of information about the weather, the time, and potential dangers. they listen to the night, we try to block it out, perhaps we could try to listen again. We could try turning off the fan or the white noise machine. We could open a window and listen to the sounds of the night where we live. We might hear crickets or the wind or the distant rumble of a train. By paying attention to the soundscape of our own night, we might find a new connection to our environment. We might rediscover that silence is not empty. It is a space that allows us to hear the world and ourselves more clearly. Have we become so addicted to background noise that we are now afraid of true silence? What do we lose when we trade the informative sounds of the natural world for the sterile hum of a white noise machine? Could soundscape therapy, re-exposing ourselves to natural nighttime sounds, be a way to improve our sleep and reduce our anxiety? Number 10, how did they wake up without an alarm? The sound is jarring, a buzzing, a beeping, or a blaring piece of music. You fumble in the dark to hit the snooze button. This is how most of us start our day. The alarm clock is our master. It tells us when our sleep must end, regardless of whether our body is ready. It is a daily dose of stress, a sudden violent transition from rest to wakefulness. For medieval people, this experience was completely unknown. So how did they wake up on time? The primary alarm clock for most of history was the sun. The human body has an internal clock, the circadian rhythm, that is naturally synchronized with the 24-hour cycle of light and dark. When the sun rises, the increasing light signals the brain to stop producing melatonin and start producing cortisol, a hormone that promotes wakefulness. For centuries, people woke up naturally as the sky brightened. Their bodies eased into wakefulness gently, in tune with the environment. This was not just a passive process. People were skilled at reading the light. They knew the position of the stars and the quality of the pre-dawn light. A farmer knew he had to be up at the very first hint of dawn to get his work started. His body clock would have been finely tuned to this daily rhythm. For those who lived in towns or monasteries, there was another powerful timekeeper, the church bell. From the early Middle Ages, monasteries organized their day around a strict schedule of prayers called the canonical hours. Bells would ring out to call the monks to prayer, starting with matins in the middle of the night. These bells were the public clock for everyone, not just the monks. Their sound carried across the town and into the surrounding countryside, marking the passage of time. The morning bell for prime or louds was the signal for the whole community to start its day. It was a communal and arguably more pleasant alternative to the private jarring alarm clock. People also relied on natural sounds. The crowing of the rooster is the classic example. Roosters have an internal clock that causes them to start crowing a few hours before dawn. For any household that kept chickens, this was a reliable, if sometimes early, wake-up call. Of course, there's the human element. In a household where everyone slept in the same room, one person waking up would likely stir the others. Or a designated person, like a servant, might be tasked with waking the rest of the household. This all points to a more gradual and natural process of waking up. It was not a sudden event, but a transition. This is much healthier for the body. The sudden stress of an alarm clock triggers a spike in heart rate and blood pressure, a fight or flight response first thing in the morning. A natural awakening allows the body to come to consciousness slowly. Sleep inertia, that groggy, disoriented feeling we often have when we first wake up, is much worse when we are forced awake by an alarm, especially from a deep stage of sleep. We cannot all live by the sun and the church bells anymore. Our work and school schedules are too rigid. But we can try to make our waking experience more gentle. There are now sunrise alarm clocks that mimic the dawn by gradually increasing the light in the room before the audible alarm goes off. This can help ease the body into wakefulness more naturally. We could also try to have a more consistent sleep schedule even on weekends. This helps to train our internal clock, making it more likely that we will start to wake up naturally before the alarm even goes off. The medieval world reminds us that waking up does not have to be a daily trauma. It can be a gentle, natural process of conversation between our bodies and the world around us. By moving away from the tyranny of the jarring alarm, we might find that our days start with a little more peace and a lot less stress. Is the daily shock of the alarm clock contributing to the epidemic of stress and anxiety in our society? What are the long-term health consequences of starting every single day with a jolt of adrenaline? Could a societal shift towards more flexible work start times, allowing people to wake up more naturally, be a major public health victory? Number 9, what was their pre-sleep routine? We talk a lot about sleep hygiene today. The advice is familiar: turn off screens an hour before bed, take a warm bath, read a book, meditate. We see this as a modern scientific approach to improving sleep. But the idea of a pre-sleep routine or ritual to prepare the mind and body for rest is ancient. Medieval people had their own powerful set of rituals centered not on scientific optimization, but on spiritual and physical preparation for the uncertainties of the night. For the vast majority of people in the Christian world of medieval Europe, the day ended with prayer. The final canonical hour of the day was compline. The word comes from the Latin completorium, meaning completion. It was the prayer that completed the day. Monks would chant it in their chapels, but the practice extended to lay people as well. Families would gather to say a simpler version of the prayer before bed. Compline prayers often focused on themes of protection through the night. The night was seen as a time of spiritual danger, a time when evil spirits were active and the soul was vulnerable. The prayers asked God for a peaceful night, for protection from nightmares and temptations, and for a safe awakening in the morning. A common prayer was, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." This was not just a pleasant sentiment. It was a serious act of entrusting one's soul to God before entering the sleep state, which was often seen as a small rehearsal for death. This ritual had a powerful psychological effect. It provided a clear transition from the activities of the day to the rest of the night. It was a moment to release the day's worries and anxieties into the hands of a higher power. Instead of lying in bed ruminating on their problems, they had a formal practice for letting them go. This would have been a powerful antidote to the kind of racing thoughts that keep many of us awake today. Is beyond prayer, there were physical preparations. People would ready the bed, stoke in the fire one last time to warm the room as much as possible. They would change into their night clothes if they had them, or simply sleep in their undergarments. And personal hygiene, such as washing the face and hands, was also part of the routine. These were all signals to the body that the day was over and it was time to wind down. The historian Carolee Erickson, in her book The Medieval Vision, describes how the medieval mind saw the world as being permeated with spiritual significance. Every daily act, including going to sleep, could be a religious act. This imbued their pre-sleep routine with a depth and meaning that our modern secular sleep hygiene practices often lack. We read a book to distract ourselves. They prayed to protect their souls. We can learn from this regardless of our own religious beliefs. The key takeaway is the power of a consistent, meaningful ritual. We can create our own compline. It does not have to be prayer. It could be a few minutes of journaling, writing down our worries to get them out of our head. It could be a simple stretching routine. It could be listening to a piece of calming music. The important thing is that it is a consistent practice that signals to our brain that the day is done. It should be an act of closure, a way of consciously transitioning from our active, problem-solving daytime mind to our restful nighttime mind. Our modern sleep hygiene often feels like another thing to be good at, another task to optimize. The medieval pre-sleep ritual was different. It was about surrender, not control. It was about acknowledging one's vulnerability and finding peace in that. By creating our own rituals of closure and release, we might find a deeper and more lasting peace than any sleep app can provide. Have we, in our secular world, lost the powerful psychological benefits of pre-sleep rituals that address our deepest anxieties about vulnerability and mortality? What would a modern secular ritual of commending the spirit look like? Is the problem with our sleep hygiene that it is too focused on the body and not enough on the soul? Number 8, how did they view the night itself? For us, the night is often an extension of the day. It is a problem to be solved with artificial light. It is time we can use for work, for entertainment, for socializing. We see it as a blank canvas. Or, if we are trying to sleep, we see it as an empty void, a period of lost time that we want to get through as quickly as possible. The medieval view of the night was radically different. The night was not an absence of day. It was its own distinct place with its own rules, its own character, and its own inhabitants. And as historian A. Roger Eckhart so thoroughly documents in At Day's Close, the night was a source of both profound fear and unique opportunity. The fear was palpable, the darkness was a cloak for criminals, robbers and murderers used the night to their advantage. This is why towns had a night watch, and why people locked their doors securely. The fear was also supernatural. The night was believed to be the time when the boundaries between the human and spirit worlds grew thin. Ghosts, demons, and fairies were thought to roam the land. This was not just folklore, it was a deeply held belief that shaped people's behavior. Most people would not dare to travel at night unless it was absolutely necessary. But the night was not only about fear, it also offered a freedom that the day did not. The strict social hierarchies of the day could relax a little in the darkness. In the tavern or at a nighttime festival, people of different classes might mingle more freely. The night was a time for romance, for secret meetings, for poaching in the Lord's forest. It was a time when the normal rules could be bent. The night also had a deep spiritual significance. It was the ideal time for contemplation and prayer. The silence and stillness of the night were seen as conducive to connecting with God. The monastic tradition of night vigils and prayers like matins was based on this idea. The night was a time to look inward, to examine one's conscience, and to commune with the divine. The waking watch, like that period between the two sleeps, was a perfect private opportunity for this kind of spiritual work. This dual character of the night as a time of both danger and possibility, fear and freedom, made it a rich and complex part of human experience. It was not dead time, it was alive. Our modern night has been sterilized. We have banished the demons with electric light, but we have also banished the sense of mystery and awe. We have made the night safe, but we have also made it boring. This has consequences for our sleep. When the night is just a bland interruption of the day, sleep can feel like a waste of time. We get fear of missing out if we go to bed early. We see sleep as the enemy of productivity and fun. But if we see the night as its own special realm, a time with its own unique purpose, then sleep becomes the central activity of that realm. It becomes the main event, not an intermission. We could try to cultivate a little of this medieval respect for the night. We could turn off the overhead lights and use lamps or candles in the evening to create a softer, more mysterious atmosphere. We could spend a few moments simply looking at the night sky if we are lucky enough to see stars where we live. We could recognize the night as a time for a different kind of consciousness, a time for dreams, for quiet thought, for rest. By giving the night back its character, we might find it easier to surrender to its main purpose, sleep. By taming the night with light, have we erased a whole dimension of human experience? What is the psychological cost of living in a world without mystery or shadow? Could learning to appreciate the night for its own sake, rather than seeing it as an obstacle, be the key to overcoming our modern sleep anxieties? Number 7, was sleep more than just physical? When we talk about sleep, we usually talk about it in biological terms. We discuss brain waves, sleep cycles, hormones, and neurotransmitters. We see sleep as a physical process, a function of the machine that is our body. This is a powerful and useful way of understanding sleep, but it is also incomplete. For medieval people, sleep was never just a physical event, it was a psychological, spiritual, and moral experience all at the same time. Their understanding of sleep was woven into their model of the cosmos and the human soul. Based on the humoral theory we have already discussed, the physical state of the body was directly linked to one's emotional and spiritual state. A person who was full of anger and choler, yellow bile, would have hot, dry, and agitated sleep. A person who was melancholic, full of black bile, would have cold, dark, and fearful dreams. Good sleep was a sign of a well-balanced body and, by extension, a well-balanced soul. Theologians and moralists also paid close attention to sleep. Sloth, or acedia, was one of the 7 deadly sins. This was not just laziness, but a kind of spiritual listlessness and despair. Oversleeping could be seen as a symptom of this sin. On the other hand, an inability to sleep could be a sign of a guilty conscience. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, a play steeped in medieval and early modern beliefs, the guilt-ridden Macbeth famously laments that he has murdered sleep and will sleep no more. His insomnia is a direct result of his moral transgression. Sleep was a moral landscape. What you did in your dreams could have moral significance. The temptations you faced in a dream were real temptations. The piety you felt in a dream was real piety. It was a proving ground for the soul. This holistic view meant that the approach to solving sleep problems was also holistic. A person could not sleep, a medieval doctor or priest would not just look at their physical habits. They would ask about their diet, their emotional state, their prayer life, and their moral conduct. They would see the problem as a symptom of a deeper imbalance in the person's whole life. The solution might involve a change in diet, a course of herbal remedies, a period of prayer and confession, or all of the above. They treated the whole person, not just the symptom of sleeplessness. This is something our modern medicine is slowly starting to rediscover. We are beginning to understand the powerful connections between our mental health and our sleep. We know that anxiety and depression are major causes of insomnia, and that insomnia, in turn, can worsen anxiety and depression. We know that stress, a psychological state, has profound physical effects on the body that disrupt sleep. The field of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, is based on this mind-body connection. It helps people change the thoughts and behaviors that are preventing them from sleeping. The medieval world took this connection for granted. For them, there was no sharp dividing line between mind, body, and spirit. They were all part of a single integrated human being. We have spent the last few centuries taking the human being apart, studying the body as a machine, and the mind as a separate entity. This has given us incredible knowledge, but we may have lost a sense of the whole. When we struggle with sleep, perhaps we should ask ourselves some medieval questions. It is not just about what we ate or whether we looked at a screen. It is also, what is weighing on my conscience? What am I anxious about? Is there a lack of balance in my life? Am I living in a way that is true to my values? By looking at our sleep through this wider lens, we might find that the root of our problem is not in our bedroom, but in our life. And by addressing that deeper issue, we might find that restful sleep follows naturally. In our scientific, biological view of sleep, have we lost the crucial understanding that sleep is also a matter of the heart and soul? Could a modern confession, talking to a therapist or a trusted friend, be one of the most effective sleep aids available? What if we started treating our sleep problems not as a medical issue, but as a message from our deeper self that something in our life needs to change? Number 6, what if interruption was the point? For us, the perfect night of sleep is an uninterrupted one. We go to bed, we fall asleep, and 8 hours later, we wake up, having been blissfully unconscious the whole time. Any interruption, a noise, a need to use the bathroom, a child crying is seen as a flaw, a disruption to be minimized. The goal is seamless, consolidated sleep, but what if this is the wrong goal? What if the interruptions are not a bug, but a feature? The medieval sleep pattern of first and second sleep was built around a major interruption, the waking watch. This was not something to be avoided, it was an expected and valued part of the night. As we have seen, it was a time for prayer, reflection, intimacy, and creative thought. The night was not a single, monolithic block of unconsciousness. It was a landscape with different phases and different purposes. This acceptance of interruption extended beyond the watch. In a world of communal sleeping, interruptions were constant. People were sleeping in the same room, often in the same bed. A baby would cry. Someone would get up to add wood to the fire. Someone else would have a coughing fit. It was impossible to expect a perfectly silent, undisturbed night. People simply learned to sleep through a certain level of noise and activity. And if they were woken up, they learned to fall back asleep without fuss or anxiety. This is a stark contrast to our modern intolerance for any kind of sleep disruption. We become angry at a snoring partner, at a noisy neighbor, at a barking dog. We see these things as an assault on our right to perfect sleep. This very anger and frustration is often what keeps us awake long after the initial disturbance has passed. The historian Craig Koslowski, in his book Evening's Empire, argues that our modern desire for consolidated, private, and uninterrupted sleep is linked to the rise of individualism and the Protestant work ethic. Sleep became a private matter, a personal responsibility. It was seen as a time for the individual to efficiently recharge in order to be a productive worker the next day. Any interruption was a threat to this efficiency. But what have we lost with this mindset? The medieval night, with its built-in pauses and its shared space, was a more social and flexible experience. The waking watch provided a unique mental state, a form of quiet, dreamy consciousness that is different from both full wakefulness and deep sleep. Some historians and writers have speculated that this was a highly creative state. It was a time when the rational mind was quiet, and new ideas and insights could bubble up. By eliminating this pause, we may have lost a valuable source of creativity and self-reflection. We have also lost a degree of resilience. By expecting and demanding perfect sleep, we have become less able to cope when it inevitably gets disrupted. A new parent, for example, is often told that their life is about to be ruined by sleep deprivation. But for most of human history, being woken up by a baby was a normal part of life that people were better adapted to handle. The expectation was not 8 straight hours, so the failure to get it was not a catastrophe. We can try to cultivate a little more of this medieval acceptance. We can recognize that life is messy and that perfect, uninterrupted sleep is a rare gift, not an entitlement. When we are woken up at night, we can try to react with less anger and more acceptance. We can see it not as a disaster, but as a brief pause. We might even try to use that moment of quiet wakefulness for a brief prayer or a moment of gratitude, turning the interruption into an opportunity. By letting go of our obsession with perfect, uninterrupted sleep, we might find that we get more of the real, imperfect rest that we actually need. Is our obsession with uninterrupted sleep making us more fragile and less resilient? Have we medicalized the normal interruptions of life into a disorder? What unique forms of creativity and insight have been lost now that we no longer have that quiet, contemplative watch in the middle of the night? Number 5. How did they survive without blue light filters? This one seems obvious. Medieval people were not exposed to the blue light from screens because they did not have screens. But the implications of this are so profound that it is worth exploring in its own right. We are living through a massive, uncontrolled experiment on the human race. What happens when a species that evolved over millions of years with only the sun, the moon, and fire for light is suddenly flooded with artificial blue spectrum light 24 hours a day? The results, at least for our sleep, have been disastrous. The science is clear. Our internal body clock, the circadian rhythm, is primarily regulated by light. Specialized cells in our retinas detect the ambient light and send signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. Blue wavelength light, which is abundant in daylight, is a particularly strong signal. It tells our brain it is daytime, be awake, be alert. As the sun sets, the amount of blue light in the environment decreases dramatically. The light from a fire or a candle is on the red and orange end of the spectrum. This shift in light color is a key signal for the brain to start producing melatonin and prepare for sleep. For our medieval ancestors, this signaling system worked perfectly. The light in their environment gave their brains a clear, unambiguous message about the time of day. Daylight meant wakefulness. The warm, dim light of the fire at night, followed by profound darkness, meant it was time to rest. Their biology and their environment were in perfect sync. Now, consider our modern environment. We spend our days indoors under fluorescent lights, which often lack the full spectrum of natural sunlight. Then, in the evening, when our brains should be getting the signal to wind down, we stare directly into devices that emit a powerful stream of blue light. Our smartphones, tablets, computers, and televisions are all blasting our retinas with a daytime signal right up until the moment we try to sleep. A 2015 study from Brigham and Women's Hospital compared the effects of reading on an iPad before bed to reading a printed book. The results were stark. The iPad users took longer to fall asleep, had less REM sleep, and were more tired and less alert the next morning. The blue light from the screen was suppressing their melatonin production and shifting their circadian rhythm. We are essentially giving ourselves a dose of jet lag every single night. Medieval people had no need for blue light filters or night shift mode on their phones. Their entire world was a natural blue light filter in the evening. This is perhaps one of the most significant and unappreciated advantages they had when it came to sleep. Their hormonal systems were not being scrambled by artificial light. We cannot go back to living by candlelight. But we can take this lesson very seriously. The single most effective thing most of us could do to improve our sleep is to manage our light exposure. This means getting bright natural light in the morning, if possible, to set our body clock. And it means drastically reducing our exposure to blue light in the evening. This is not just about turning on a filter on our phone. It is about changing our habits. We can make a rule no screens for at least an hour before bed. We can read a physical book. We can talk to our family. We can listen to music. We can dim the overhead lights and use warm colored lamps instead. By recreating a more medieval light environment in our homes in the evening, we are giving our brains the clear signal they need to do what they do best, prepare us for a night of deep, restorative sleep. Are we the most sleep-deprived generation in history simply because we're the first to live with perpetual, artificial daylight? If the blue light from screens is as disruptive as a shot of caffeine, should these devices come with a health warning? What if the most powerful sleep technology is not a new app or a smart mattress, but a simple, old-fashioned off switch? Number 4, did they see laziness differently? In our modern, productivity-obsessed culture, laziness is one of the worst insults you can throw at someone. It is tied up with failure, with a lack of ambition, with being a drain on society. We praise the hustle, the grind, the person who works 80 hours a week and sleeps only 4 hours a night. Rest is often seen as a necessary evil, something you do only so you can get back to being productive. The idea of resting for its own sake, of being truly idle, makes us uncomfortable. The medieval world had a more nuanced and, in some ways, more sophisticated view of idleness. Yes, as we have mentioned, slothicidia was a deadly sin, but this was not about simply being inactive. Acedia was a spiritual condition, a kind of despair and apathy that led a person to neglect their duties to God and to their community. It was a lack of care. A farmer who let his fields go to ruin out of acedia was a problem. But simple rest and leisure were not seen as sinful. In fact, they were built into the very fabric of society. The religious calendar was filled with holy days, or holidays, which were mandatory days of rest. There were major feasts like Christmas and Easter, but there were also dozens of saints' days scattered, throughout the year. On these days, all but the most essential work was forbidden. People were expected to attend church and then to feast, to play games, and to rest. The economic historian Juliet Schor has estimated that the average medieval peasant may have had more days off per year than the average modern American worker. This rhythm of work and rest was seen as divinely ordained. The book of Genesis says that God worked for 6 days to create the world and then rested on the seventh. This was the model for human life. Rest was not a sign of failure. It was a sacred duty, a way of honoring God and respecting the natural limits of the human body. This attitude would have profoundly shaped their relationship with sleep. Sleep was the ultimate form of rest, the daily Sabbath for the body. It was not something to be minimized or hacked to get more productive hours in the day. It was a necessary and good part of God's creation. They did not have our modern anxiety about wasting time while they slept. Sleep was not wasted time. It was a different kind of time, with its own purpose. We have largely lost this concept of sacred rest. Our holidays have become commercialized opportunities for shopping. Our weekends are often filled with chores and errands, just a different kind of work. The idea that we should have regularly scheduled enforced periods of doing absolutely nothing is completely foreign to us. Perhaps we need to rediscover the distinction between sinful sloth and sacred rest. We can start by being kinder to ourselves. We can recognize that we are not machines. We need periods of true idleness, of unproductive, guilt-free rest. This means more than just sleep. It means taking a walk with no destination. It means sitting and watching the clouds. It means allowing our minds to wander without a goal. By re-embracing the value of idleness, we might find that it takes the pressure off our sleep. If our whole life is a relentless drive for productivity, then sleep can feel like a frustrating obstacle. But if we see rest and leisure as a valuable and necessary part of a good life, then sleep becomes just one part of that larger, healthier pattern. It becomes less of a performance and more of a pleasure. The medieval peasant understood that a field must lie fallow to be fertile. The same is true of the human mind and body. Have we confused the spiritual sin of sloth with the biological necessity of rest? What would our society look like if we had as many mandatory holy days of rest as the medieval calendar did? Is our constant quest for productivity actually making us less creative and effective in the long run? Number 3 was waking up a spiritual act. For most of us, waking up is a purely functional event. The alarm goes off, we get out of bed, and we start the day's tasks. It is a transition we try to make as quickly as possible. We might be groggy, we might be grumpy, but we rarely attach any deeper meaning to the moment of awakening. For the medieval person, waking up was a moment freighted with spiritual significance. It was a daily resurrection. Sleep was often metaphorically linked with death. To fall asleep was to enter a small temporary death. To awaken in the morning was to be reborn, to be given the gift of another day of life. This was not just a poetic idea, it was a deeply felt reality. In a world with high rates of disease and mortality, going to sleep each night came with no absolute guarantee of waking up. So, to open one's eyes to the morning light was a genuine reason for gratitude. This is reflected in the morning prayers that were a standard part of medieval life. Just as the day ended with the prayers of Compline, it began with the prayers of Prime or Lauds. These prayers were first and foremost prayers of thanksgiving. They thanked God for protection through the night and for the gift of a new day. They were an act of consciously acknowledging one's dependence on a higher power for the very fact of existence. This first act of the day set the tone for everything that followed. By starting the day with gratitude and a sense of purpose, they were framing their daily labor not as a meaningless grind, but as an opportunity to serve God and their community. The first thought was not, ugh, I have to go to work, but thank you, God, for this day. This practice of a morning ritual is something we are rediscovering through the modern mindfulness movement. Many self-help experts now recommend starting the day not by grabbing your phone to check emails, but by taking a few moments for quiet reflection, meditation, or journaling. The goal is to start the day with intention, rather than reactivity. This is, in essence, a secular version of what the medieval person did with their morning prayer. The spiritual dimension of waking up also offered a way to frame the day's challenges. The morning prayer often included a plea for strength and guidance to face the temptations and difficulties of the day ahead. It was an acknowledgement that life was hard and that one needed help to navigate it well. This is a far cry from the modern pressure to wake up and crush it, to be a hyper-confident, self-sufficient productivity machine. The medieval mindset was one of humility and dependence, which may have been a more psychologically healthy way to face the world. We can learn from this. We can try to reclaim the moment of awakening as a meaningful one. Before we reach for our phones, we can take just 1 minute. We can lie in bed and think of one thing we are grateful for. It could be as simple as the warmth of the blankets or the light coming through the window. We can set a simple intention for the day to be kind, to be patient, to do our best. This small shift can have a remarkable effect. It can change the color of our entire day. It can move us from a state of groggy resentment to one of quiet gratitude. It turns the mundane act of waking up into a moment of conscious, deliberate living. The medieval person knew that how you begin the day matters. It is a lesson we would do well to remember. In a world where life is generally safer and longer, have we lost the profound sense of gratitude that comes from seeing each new day as a gift? What is the psychological cost of starting our day by immediately plugging into a stream of digital demands and bad news? Could a simple 1-minute morning ritual of gratitude be more powerful than any productivity hack? Number 2, did they listen to their bodies more? We think we are very attuned to our bodies. We track our steps, our heart rate, our calories, our sleep cycles. We have more data about our physical selves than any generation in history. But are we actually listening, or are we just measuring? There is a difference. Listening is a subtle, intuitive process. Measuring is a quantitative, external one. Medieval people had no data, they had no choice but to listen. Their lives were profoundly physical. For most, work was not sitting at a desk, but plowing a field, shoeing a horse, or spinning wool. They were intimately familiar with the feeling of fatigue in their muscles, the pang of hunger in their stomach, the chill of the air on their skin. Their bodies were not an afterthought. They were the primary tool with which they navigated the world. This constant physical feedback loop created a deep, intuitive understanding of their own bodily needs. When it came to sleep, they did not have a clock telling them it was bedtime. They had the feeling of sleepiness. This feeling, which we now know is caused by the buildup of a chemical called adenosine in the brain, was their guide. When the sun went down and the day's labor was done, they felt tired, and so they went to bed. It was that simple. They did not fight it with caffeine and artificial light. They honored the signal their body was sending. Similarly, they did not have an alarm clock telling them to wake up. They had the feeling of being rested. They woke when their body's need for sleep had been satisfied, or when the external cue of the morning light told them it was time. Their sleep was regulated by an internal biological clock, not an external mechanical one. This is a fundamentally different approach from ours. We often treat our bodies as an inconvenience. We feel tired, but we have to finish a report, so we drink another coffee. We feel full, but the food tastes good, so we keep eating. We ignore our body's signals in favor of the demands of our schedule, our desires, or our devices. Our sleep trackers tell us we got a poor score, so we feel anxious even if we feel fine. Or they tell us we slept well, so we ignore the fact that we feel exhausted. We have outsourced our own intuition to technology. The medieval reliance on bodily intuition extended to illness as well. A person felt unwell not because a lab test told them so, but because they felt a lack of energy, a pain, or a general sense of imbalance. As we have seen, the response was often to rest, to allow the body to heal. The first and most important piece of diagnostic information was the patient's own subjective experience of their body. We could benefit from trying to reclaim this kind of bodily intuition. We can practice checking in with ourselves. How do I actually feel right now? Am I tired? Am I hungry? Am I stressed? We can try to disentangle the signals from our body from the data from our devices. A good sleep score is meaningless if you wake up feeling terrible. A bad night of sleep, according to your app, might not be a problem if you feel rested and energetic. We can try to honor our body's signal for sleepiness in the evening. Instead of pushing through it to watch one more episode, we could see it as a gentle invitation to rest. We can treat our bodies less like a machine to be optimized and more like a wise living organism to be partnered with. This requires a shift from measuring to listening, from controlling to trusting. The medieval person had no other choice. For us, it is a conscious decision we have to make, a skill we have to relearn. Has our data-driven approach to health made us deaf to the subtle, intuitive language of our own bodies? What happens to a person's self-trust when they believe an app knows more about their sleep than they do? Could the simplest and most radical act of self-care be to put away all the trackers and simply ask our body what it needs? Number one, what if sleep was not a problem to be solved? This may be the most important and most challenging medieval attitude we can re-embrace. For us, sleep is a problem. It is a problem to be managed, optimized, hacked, and perfected. The multi-billion-dollar sleep industry is built on this premise. It sells us mattresses, pillows, supplements, apps, and machines, all promising to solve our sleep. We read articles and books that give us rules and checklists for perfect sleep hygiene. The underlying message is always the same: you are probably doing it wrong and you need to fix it. This entire framework would have been incomprehensible to a medieval person. Sleep was not a problem. It was a given. It was a natural, inevitable part of life, like breathing or eating. It was not something you did or achieved. It was something you surrendered to. They certainly had sleep troubles at times. They got sick, they worried, they were uncomfortable. Medical texts offered gentle remedies, but they did not have a pervasive cultural anxiety about sleep itself. They did not pathologize every bad night. They did not have a concept of insomnia as a chronic disease in the way we do. A period of poor sleep was seen as a temporary affliction, a symptom of some other imbalance, not a standalone failure of the sleep system. The very idea of trying to control sleep would have seemed strange. Sleep, like the weather or the seasons, was part of a larger natural order that was ultimately in God's hands. Their pre-sleep prayers were an act of surrender, of letting go of control. Our pre-sleep routines are often an exercise in control, in trying to manipulate every variable to guarantee a perfect outcome. This desperate need for control is a hallmark of anxiety, and it is this anxiety, more than anything else, that is the enemy of sleep. Sleep, by its very nature, requires a letting go of control. By turning sleep into a performance, we have made it infinitely harder. Imagine if we treated breathing this way. Imagine tracking every breath, worrying if it was deep enough, if the rate was optimal, if you were breathing correctly. You would quickly become a gasping, anxious mess. This is what we have done to sleep. The medieval attitude offers a radical alternative. What if we just stopped trying so hard? What if we approached our beds not with a checklist and a goal, but with a simple sense of trust? Strong trust in our body's ancient, innate ability to rest. Trust that even a bad night is not a catastrophe. Trust that sleep is not a fragile, delicate thing that we can easily break, but a robust, powerful, natural drive that will eventually assert itself if we can just get out of our own way. This is not an argument for complacency. It is an argument for a different kind of effort, the effort of non-effort. The effort of acceptance. It means accepting that some nights you will sleep well and some nights you will not, just as some days you will feel happy and some days you will feel sad. It means taking the focus off the night and putting it on the day. Like living a balanced, healthy, meaningful day is the best preparation for a restful night. Let go of the numbers. Let go of the trackers. Let go of the idea that you have to earn or achieve sleep. Let go of the belief that sleep is a problem. The medieval person slept in a cold, dark, noisy, crowded room on a lumpy bed of straw. And they probably slept better than many of us because they had one thing we lack: a profound and unshakable faith that when night came, their body knew what to do. Perhaps it is time we gave our own bodies that same credit. What if the entire modern sleep industry is built on a fundamentally flawed premise? Is the very act of trying to sleep the single biggest cause of insomnia? What would happen if we all decided for 1 week to treat sleep not as a challenge to be overcome, but as a friend to be welcomed?